Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Shuster. So what happens when Mount Trashmore in Virginia Beach leaks? I got some relatives down there, and that particular landfill, that dump, is right by the sea. And there are, of course, great concerns that sea levels are gonna rise perhaps by 8 feet over the next 80 years. And Mount Trashmore, of course, is not the only landfill. There are plenty of them and toxic waste dumps that are in danger in case the seawaters continue to rise. Well, this is one of the underreported issues in global warming, except at The Nation, where Dave Lindorf has been writing about this and doing some investigative work. He is a contributor to The Nation. Dave, thanks for joining us. How many of these sites are, say, within 10 feet of current sea levels?
Half of all the landfills known to exist in the country, which is 100,000, are at that. They're in the 30-odd counties that where they are at least or no more than 10 feet above sea level.
And they were not built to withstand sea levels rising and essentially breaching their banks or their walls, right?
No, most of them, all except about 3,000 currently functioning landfills, were put in the ground before anyone ever thought about sea level rise. They go back, as far as 150 years, and we don't even know what's in them if they were before 1980. So we don't know where some of them are, and we don't know what's in the bottoms of any of them.
One would assume that a lot of these would be toxic if they started seeping into groundwater and oceans and everything else.
Well, think about the fact that before 1980, when the US really began deindustrializing, there was industry in almost every community, except in rural areas. And those industries would dump whatever they had in their process, industrial process that was toxic, would just go in a truck and go to the local landfill and be dumped. And there was no requirement to record what you were putting in. There was no rules about what could go in. And so all these dumps that predate 1980 have like everything in them. I found one in one of the 13 closed dumps in the New Jersey Meadowlands that actually has waste from the Manhattan Project.
So how fearful are scientists about the breach of these dumps and landfills and toxic waste sites?
Well, when you ask a scientist, an environmental scientist, about a landfill, say like what's in the New Jersey Meadowlands or down along the Gulf Coast near Houston or something, and you ask them, they'll say, "Oh God, that would be horrible if that got into the bayous or into the Raritan River estuary or whatever." But nobody has thought of this systemically. My article is the first case of this being examined in the United States ever. And everybody I talk to says, "Gee, I never thought of that." Landfill managers, coastal planners, nobody's thought about the fact that all of these 50,000 landfills are at risk of being inundated and ripped open. Now, it's not a seepage that's the problem. It's being ripped open.
A lot of people are freaked out by your article and the idea of seepage and all the poisonous chemicals sort of going to the water. And there seems to be, I'm sure people are going to react and say, okay, let's start cleaning things up. But you point out there's an incentive, there's sort of a perverse incentive for politicians right now not to clean it up. Explain that.
Yeah, this was explained to me by a climate scientist, Harold Wanless, very well-known sea level rise expert and ice melt expert. And he was saying that the politics of it are that landfills are all locally controlled, locally owned, locally managed, and monitored by state governments. And politicians at the state level and especially at the local level don't see their careers as being local or state. They all are looking to go where the money and power is, which is in Washington. So they're not, they're sort of constitutionally incapable of doing things that are going to raise taxes locally and ruin their electoral chances of moving upward. And they figured they're going to be gone, hopefully, in their view, to other things before any of this is going to redound on them for not having dealt with it.
Yeah, so why spend the money right now if you're a local mayor or governor? Why spend the money now on something that may not be a problem for decades from now, even though decades from now it'll be that much more expensive and financially terrible for all of us, right?
And even too late, at some point. I mean, if these things are surrounded by water, it's going to be very hard to move them.
Is there any idea about whether the original businesses, the oil companies, the coal mining companies, all the rest that did this dumping, can they be forced to clean some of this up?
There are some efforts already. The city of Baltimore, the state of Massachusetts, the state of Rhode Island, the state of California, Imperial City in California, places are suing the oil industry, the major ones, and saying, you brought this on, you lied and pressured Congress and the EPA not to act on it. On global warming, you brought the sea level rise. And so you need to pay for it. And it's going into the courts, some success, but the real problem is that now we have a Supreme Court that is not going to be very amenable to supporting that kind of an argument at the end of the line.
It does seem, I mean, the argument that sea levels are rising now seems to be embraced even by a lot of conservatives. They will say, well, man has nothing to do with it. The sea levels rise because temperatures go up, temperatures go down, whatever. But there is this theory on the right that, well, why should we suffer economically now? I mean, we might as well just ask humans to do what they've always done, and that is to adapt to it. Is it possible to adapt, as the kids at Fox and Friends say, when you have toxic waste dumps that are seeping into the water?
Well, for one thing, if you look at the recommendations, they've been dealing with 3 to 4 feet recommendation or predictions from the IPCC. Now the IPCC is saying 6 feet. NOAA says 8.5 feet are the maximums. When you plan crisis, you insure your home, anything, you plan for the worst case scenario so that if it happens, you're set. You don't plan for the minimum. Right. And what they're all doing is looking at the minimum. And they also are looking at 2,100 as kind of a goalpost. And if they can get there, it's touchdown in their home. Their home, I just did, second game. It's like home base, home plate. They got there, they're in, it's over. But that's not what happens. At 2,100, then the seas are going to be rising faster. And they're going to continue to rise because of what's baked into the atmosphere temperature. So, and the ice melt. So it's not the end, even if it isn't 8.5 feet by 2,200. It's going to be 2,210, 2,220, and it's going to keep rising. So these things are all going to be underwater, and major cities are going to be underwater too. So that argument that people make is nuts.
And there's also, I guess, this appreciation now, at least among, for example, when I tell this to my relatives in Virginia Beach, and I started this segment by talking about them. I mean, Virginia Beach is in danger because of sea levels rising anyway. But I suppose we will reach a point in our society where people will realize, you know what, if I want to hold on to the value that I have of my property, I need to sell before this becomes a crisis, because we will all start, our children, our grandchildren will start to calculate years from now where to buy property based on, okay, what are the dangers to those areas from sea levels rising, and is there a toxic waste dump that might breach near where we live that could ruin life there?
Well, actually, this is another reason why they need to move quickly, because what's going to happen is the insurance industry is going to recognize that they want out, because then they're not going to renew insurance on properties along the shore, because that'll be a catastrophe for them. And the other thing that Professor Wanless pointed out is that if communities wait to deal with these landfills, the prices will start to drop soon, and then their tax base will collapse, and they won't even have the money to do anything with these problems that we're facing, like the landfills or like the infrastructure of the water and sewers and things like that.
Is this primarily just a problem in the United States, or is there a similar problem for countries around the world that also have coastlines and oceans?
It's global. The only reason ours is so huge is because our waste pile is so huge. We produce 250 million tons of garbage per year. And a lot of it gets shipped to third world countries, remember, like Indonesia, Ghana, other African nations with coastlines, and they get put on the shores. The other point I'll make, because we're running out of time, is that 70% of sea life in the oceans has some part of their breeding cycle in the wetlands where most of these dumps are located. And so those are all in jeopardy. So we're not just talking about pollution that's annoying. It's going to kill off vast quantities of sea life by ruining how they breed.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because never mind what happens inland, what happens in the first couple of miles in the ocean where so much of the sea life exists will also be destroyed and irreparably harmed. It is a terrifying article, but one that I hope everybody reads, and perhaps it sparks some sort of action in communities and states across the United States and also in places around the world. Dave Lindorf, he's a contributor, investigative reporter for The Nation. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.